a belief that all citizens are disloyal. It'll create cynicism and a sense that the government then becomes illegitimate. And the greatest strength any country has is the allegiance and loyalty of its people. That's the greatest strength, and not the weapons, not the guns, and things of that sort.
Certainly. I mean, in the last few decades, the military-industrial complex, the big crony capitalist, non-free market mega banks, they've tried to keep the velvet glove on the iron fist. But now, because Congress for now, 2 years has had a 9% approval rating, even liberals, big government people say they fear big government more than, the free market and corporations now. So there is an awakening. So I think the system is just dispensing with even the ceremony now. I mean, we were talking about this before we went live here. This was put on the White House website 2 weeks ago. Strategic implementation for plan for empowering local partners to prevent violent extremism in the United States. And it's a federal announcement saying domestic terror is the #1 threat, and speech criticizing the government, there's bizarre quotes in here, is aiding terror. And there's a President Obama quote in here where he says, I'll read it, "As a government, we are working to prevent all types of extremism." So now terrorism is extremism that leads to violence. Oh, see, the extremism, the talk leads to violence, regardless of who inspires it. And they go on to say, we're now worried about domestic groups, mainly right-wing. Quote, at the same time, countering al-Qaeda's violent ideology is one part of the comprehensive strategy to defeat al-Qaeda. Over the past 2.5 years, more key al-Qaeda leaders, including Osama bin Laden, have been eliminated or in rapid succession than any time since September 11th. We have strengthened Homeland Security and improved information sharing thanks to coordinated intelligence and law enforcement. Numerous terrorist plots have been thwarted, saving many American lives. And then they go on to say extremism, extreme talk is now aiding al-Qaeda. And so it makes this bridge. And if you read deeper into this, that they're going to use the NDAA, the military, basically against the American people. And as we know with the MIAC and Homeland Security reports that law enforcement sent me 3 years ago, none of this has to do with foreign threats or al-Qaeda and all this talk. It's always about Tea Partiers, Ron Paul, Bob Barr, constitutionalist. I mean, what does this signify as a constitutional lawyer and expert?
Well, it shows that the Constitution has been vandalized by the government, and the government needs to be held accountable. And it turns, I say, the idea of the republic on its head. The glory of a republic is liberty. The individual is the center of our constitutional solar system. In an empire, what we've got today, big government encroaching on all of our liberties is the earmark, and dominion and domination is the so-called glory of an empire. So we're so far away from the Constitution as it was drafted and understood and celebrated 220 years ago that we might as well be King George III. The President of the United States at present enjoys more authority than King George, who we overthrew because of his tyrannical powers in 1776. That is where we are. The Constitution has been so defaced, it's been so warped to just empower the government to encroach and stamp and destroy our liberties. And now when they're suggesting freedom of speech, the freedom to criticize the government, which should be welcomed since the government errs so often they need instruction rather than echo chambers, is now being made suspect. And indeed, we had the situation when the Patriot Act was passed shortly after 9/11, where the then Attorney General said anybody who criticized the Patriot Act was aiding and abetting the enemy. It's this delusion that causes the President Obama to say he doesn't understand why people in Afghanistan or Pakistan are trying to kill our soldiers just because we're trying to shoot them, Maybe it's because if we stopped shooting them, then they wouldn't be protesting with violence. And maybe if the government obeyed the Constitution, they wouldn't get the extreme speech. And I don't want to suggest that we're at the precipice of justifying, violent revolution. But we never should forget that in that Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson wrote and all of our founding fathers subscribed to, it says, when a government evinces a consistent train of action that displays an intent to reduce us to vassals, there's not only a right, a duty to change and overthrow the government and to supply a new dispensation that will protect our liberties. And the government's got to recognize you cannot continue to try to oppress all of our opportunities to speak and to argue and to display total and complete opposition to what we think are vandalizations of our constitutional rights and expect to retain power. One of the things that I think is most unfortunate because of the historical ways in which it was, in some respects, was discredited, we need to go to the impeachment power. You know, Congress needs to stand up to the plate. The members should be impeached themselves if they're not honoring the Constitution, and any president of the United States who says that he can use the military to arrest us because he says that he suspects we're substantially aiding, you know, Al-Qaeda or Taliban, we don't have a right to rebut it. There's no trial. There's no accusation. We just get to rot.
Yeah, why would Congress
should not stay there?
Why, I mean, there's several questions here, but it's all intriguing and is the big issue of the day. Why would the Congress try to give the president the power of a dictator? But before you go there, Ron Paul, the congressman, the presidential candidate, was on my radio show last Tuesday. And the video of it's gone around the web. It's been seen millions of times. It's radio/TV. And he said basically what you've said, but he said the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, establishes martial law in this country. And that's what Jonathan Turley said. That's basically what you've said. And literally more than 200, if you go to Google News and type in Ron Paul Alex Jones, from that interview, more than 200 newspapers, CBS, ABC TV, basically said Ron Paul's an extremist and dangerous, and groups said that's why he's being kicked out of the upcoming debate. This shows why he's so off track. Meanwhile, it's all over the news that they're putting military on the streets. In Illinois and Louisiana, it's on CNN 2 days ago. They're calling for troops to stop crime. The TSA is setting up checkpoints now on highways in Tennessee and other areas. This is all happening. They're saying they're going to do this, and then Ron Paul says, look, the emperor wears no clothes, and they howl that he's nuts. I mean, this is a weird paradox where everything you've warned about, he's warned about, others have warned about for decades is now manifesting, and they're separately pushing military on the streets, but then saying Ron Paul's crazy because he doesn't want it, because it doesn't exist. I mean, what is this?
Well, it's what Samuel Taylor Coleridge called a temporary suspension of disbelief. It's really Orwellian is the only word I can think of it. You know, call Ron Paul an extremist for defending and honoring the Constitution of the United States, and the non-extremists are the ones who are in favor of destroying the rule of law and imposing a government that we overthrew 220 some years ago called Great Britain with a monarch. I mean, it's hard to even have words to describe, you know, the absurdity of the characterization. Ron is the one who would have been there at the Battle of Bunker Hill. You know, these guys would have all been with the Tories and with the king. And it is an example, however, that those who are in power don't want to yield it. And power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And you indicated, well, why has Congress crowned the president with such overwhelming authority? I say it's because Congress has become the invertebrate branch of government. And it wants to surrender all authority to the president because it doesn't want to be held accountable for anything. They feel they have cushy jobs. They get the money to come, you know, to pay them their campaign expenses, and they'll sit there and act like they're in a movie, and they enjoy the momentary thrill of getting on television or radio from time to time. But they do not want accountability. They want to run away from accountability. That's why every time you come to a crunch where you're going to have to decide whether really you're going to cut government back, what does Congress do? Kick the ball down the road. 2 months, 6 months, 7 months, but never actually doing anything other than postponing today. It's like a little kid procrastinating. And that's the one element I believe the founding fathers were just stunned. They didn't think a branch would surrender power. But I think the reason why they misconceived how this has evolved here in 2011 is that the political parties have replaced the Constitution as the source of the allegiance of these members of Congress. They believe they're Democrats or Republicans, Dallas Cowboys, Washington Redskins, or New Orleans Saints, but they're not Americans. You know, it's just their side, and they play like this is really just a game. It's not for the people of the United States. And that's why, hey, as long as their guy's in power, hey, give them all the power that you want, because that'll help you in the next election cycle. And it happens on both sides. And we've got to get rid of that idea. There's only one oath that members of Congress take. That's to the Constitution of the United States. They do not take an oath to the Republicans or Democrats or the president. The Constitution alone.
Let me go back to this question. I want to get into Ron Paul briefly before you got to go. I know you're very busy, sir. You're heading up a lot of the campaign policies and things. and supporting Congressman Paul. But Bruce, looking at this, and I mean, really working in government, being around these people for decades, studying it, why are they moving so quickly? I mean, even I am shocked by the speed of it, and I've been seeing this develop for a while. People said, oh, you're being extreme, but now it's moving faster than I even thought, and instead of getting chills once a week of concern, I'm getting them every 30 seconds. I mean, I can feel the tyranny rising, not just see it. I can, intellectually it's right there, but also in my gut. Why is the system moving at light speed towards total despotism, classical, naked, on fire, North Korean style, Kim Jong-il is God, Obama is God, anybody who doesn't like it's an enemy? What is driving this?
Well, it's a unique and curious feature of empire that as actual danger diminishes, the sense of crisis climbs. And there becomes this idea that, oh, we're super powerful, we're big government, there should be no risk at all. We need to control everything that moves, even though the genuine danger is close to zero. And that's just in the human species. When you give someone uncontrolled, unlimited power, they want to destroy any element of risk or contingency whatsoever. And they do that by exerting authority. Police, military, courts, money, or otherwise, taxation, regulation, or something like that. And that is what you would call the pathology of empire. Says this is crazy. Take a look, Alex, at this NDAA. When does it pass? 10 years after 9/11. 9/11, we had some fall. We didn't know whether Al-Qaeda had penetrated the country. Now we know how insignificant they are. They're international criminal thugs, but there are 50 of them in Afghanistan, and there are no cells in the United States. So why are we creating this draconian authority 10 years after we know it's irrelevant? And also think of this, Alex. There were no congressional hearings on the NDA. Not one. It emerged out of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Lindsey Graham, John McCain. It didn't go to judiciary. It didn't go to intelligence. There was not a single congressional finding that any of these authorities were necessary to make us safe. It just appeared. So you have to ask yourself, this is really stunning.
Well, that's like the Super Congress, where this committee of 12, when the president is the 13th, I guess Merovingian leader or whatever, they just should come up with a policy, and then you can up or down vote it, and then it kicks back if you don't. But what do you make then of all these moves towards Iran? I mean, is that just another desperate way to try to make themselves be the heroes of the people, claiming they're knocking out some new threat?
Well, absolutely. You can. The drum beats are already there. The Secretary of Defense, Panetta, had said just a couple days ago on CBS News, oh, less than a year, Iran will certainly have a nuclear weapon, and that is simply not acceptable. So he's trying to already create the justification for going to war. And then I asked, well, Mr. Panetta, I was alive at the Cuban Missile Crisis. We have a retaliatory capacity that could incinerate Iran or then the Soviet Union. Doesn't deterrence work? It worked against the Soviets. It had huge number of missiles. And when you talk about, well, Iran is the only people in the history of the world, deterrence doesn't work. They all crave self-destruction. I said, well, is that true? This Islamic regime, as zany and erratic as it is, they did release our hostages after a long, prolonged,